afternoon. You're on Likeable Science here in ThinkTech Hawaii, broadcasting from the studios in Pioneer Plaza. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. Likeable Science is all about how science is engaging, fun part of our lives. Science is not something that should be isolated off in an ivory tower and be done only by scientists. Science is and should be a part of every person's life, and should be a really very meaningful and exciting part of our lives. We're going to talk today about a really sort of very big issue, a very big and complex issue, sort of how science and technology can help sort of fundamentally shift the global economy towards a sustainability future. And to help me explore this area, I have via Skype today a guest, Ian Monroe, who is the founding CEO of a group called Oroeco, and we're largely going to talk about Oroeco and what Oroeco does and how they do it today. Ian, welcome.
Hi, Ethan. Thanks a lot for having me.
Oh, well, thank you Thank you for joining us. So, Ian is not only the founder and CEO of Oroeco, he's a lecturer in the Earth Systems program, at Stanford University. But he's done many things over his career so far. He's been a speaker for the U.S. Department of State in Honduras for a while. He's earned awards as a climate fellow. He's been a member of the Silicon Valley leadership group and done a whole slew of other things. So he's had a wide and varied career so far. And this Oroeco is, I think, his sort of latest, greatest adventure. So maybe just start, if you would, Ian, by telling us a little bit about sort of Oroeco. Give us a quick overview here.
Sure. Well, the basic idea, the big picture idea for Oroeco is we're creating a web and mobile service that makes it fun and easy and rewarding for everyone to help solve climate change. And so we're all about essentially getting both information and incentives in the right places to motivate us all as individuals to act, and then to scale those individual actions to community level actions and eventually to the societal level solutions that we really need to solve the problem.
Okay, well that sounds like a very ambitious goal. That is, you're sort of almost, it looks like, attacking the whole issue of climate change sort of from the bottom up rather than looking at it from a top-down perspective and trying to change big national policies. You want to incentivize behavior change among individuals to make their choices begin collectively to count and to have impacts on businesses, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're not saying, and certainly I as an individual am not saying, that the bottom-up approach is the only approach. We certainly think the top-down policy level solutions for climate are really necessary as well. But I come at this from about a decade of renewable energy and climate change work around the world, working out of academia, working with industry, doing traditional sustainable business accounting, working with governments and NGOs, and feeling like the biggest missing piece is really public engagement around this issue that certainly is one of the most pressing, if not the most pressing, global crises of our time to deal with, that we're all interconnected to. And feeling like the more I saw specific pieces of what we needed to do in terms of solving climate change, the more I felt that we just needed to, before being able to scale up clean technologies in the way that we really need to, get the public bought into the process. And so this is really about motivating a lot of change from the bottom up, but we think that bottom up engagement, by getting citizens engaged in the climate change issue around the world, that's something that in turn will lead to a lot more top-down support for the policies that need to be put in place as well. So while we're focusing on the bottom up, it's mainly because we feel like the bottom up has been a lot more neglected than should be the case, and that it's necessary to go alongside the top-down solutions that also are part of the puzzle.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. This is climate change is a very big, complex, multifaceted challenge, and no sort of single approach is likely to really give all the right answers, the right solutions. So it's much more a matter of what's sometimes referred to as collective impact, right? Different different sectors pushing in different ways and different angles, all working towards the same goals, hopefully. So.
Yeah, it's really a big collective action problem, and we really need a big collective action solution to the problem. And if we even just snapped our fingers and got all our policymakers to line up in the U.S. or even globally to go to 100% renewable energy tomorrow, there's still a lot of impacts related to climate change that aren't directly connected to the energy sector, like deforestation and our diets as they relate to climate, and other consumption patterns that go well beyond national boundaries. So, yeah, we really think that having a massive bottom-up engagement approach is a really necessary piece of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's I like your idea that this has really got to be tackled globally too, because it is a global problem, and people around the world certainly view it in different ways. There's still a fair number of people in the U.S. who don't really believe that it's a big issue or a serious issue, whereas out in the Pacific Islands, virtually everyone there seems to recognize that, yeah, it's happening, it's serious, it's impacting our lives already, and it's going to impact the lives of our children far worse. So you've got these different levels of engagement going, and you need to sort of be able to work with that broad an audience.
Definitely, and that engagement is the first piece. Is, I guess, having essentially more of us just care about the problem and seeing how big it is and how necessary it is to do as much as we can to slow climate change and hopefully eventually reverse climate change and avert the catastrophes that could come out of it based on the trajectory that we're on right now. But that's just the first step, is essentially admitting that we have a problem. And the next and much trickier step is shifting that admission that we have a problem to actually actions towards solving that problem. So that's a big piece of what we're doing with Oroeco, is trying to leverage what we know about behavioral psychology to really motivate us all as individuals, not just to say climate change is a problem, but actually to be actively working on a daily basis in a way that's, relatively minimally invasive and fun and easy and rewarding at the same time to solve the problem. And if you look at just global polling, certainly in the U.S., climate change, unfortunately, has become a really hyper-partisan political issue, which really it shouldn't. It's just about basic science. You talk to any credible science, really, literally anywhere in the world, every major scientific organization in the world says climate change is real, it's caused by people. It is a huge problem. Even every major oil company in the world is saying that now. Every major government in the world is saying that now. So to be in denial about that is basically just to say that you don't believe in facts.
Right.
But that's even just the first step. The next much more trickier piece is, okay, so what do we actually do about that? And so that's what we're really working on with Oroeco, is bridging this gap that we have between what we say we believe and then what we actually do. And it's certainly a gap that is there not just for climate change, but with climate change, it's a particularly big one, and one that we're working on and closing. And we think we can, if we do this successfully with climate change, replicate it for a lot of other large-scale social and environmental problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit on this really sort of interesting point where people profess certain values, they want to live their lives in certain ways, they want to believe they're doing the right thing, and with an issue like climate change, it's sometimes very hard to tell that, right? It's hard to say. I mean, it may be relatively easy to say it's better if I bike to work than if I drive my SUV to work. Yes, there's going to be less impact on the climate and blah, 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 but lots of the choices are not nearly that clear-cut, right? There's lots of subtler choices about, from buying food to what kind of materials you use to build your house, et cetera, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the good news is, I think really the vast majority of the world wants the sustainable world that I think we're talking about in terms of the environment, climate in particular, and social justice and personal health and other issues of sustainability beyond that. It's just a matter of really bridging that gap between what we say we care about, what we say we want, and then what we actually do. And really that gap exists for two reasons. It exists for a lack of information and also a lack of incentives to act on that information once it's presented. So with Oroeco, we're really focused on both sides.
So can you give us an example of that? Just a nice little concrete example, one way that Oroeco does this.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just, for your viewers out there, give a quick overview of exactly what we're doing with Oroeco, which initially on the incentive side, the saying is you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's a huge problem with our personal climate impacts, is they're essentially invisible. Greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, et cetera, can't be seen. And then also they're occurring throughout these global supply chains that are connected up to our food and our clothing and go well beyond just us filling up the tank with gasoline or turning the lights on or off. So they're also spatially disconnected from where we are. So with Oroeco, we're trying to basically measure everything in an automated fashion as easily as possible. So we're the first piece of what we do is essentially the world's first automated personal carbon tracking service. And the way we track your impacts on climate change is we essentially track how you're using energy in your home and then also where your money's going. And if you are worried about having it connected up to your personal finances, you can also have the option to fill out more survey questions, essentially, for us to give a better sense of what your lifestyle is and how that intersects with climate change. And so the first piece is automatically tracking your climate impacts. And the next piece is connecting up those climate impacts to actually be contextualized in a way that it's meaningful, because even those of us that have been working in climate for more than a decade, like I have, it is still pretty meaningless when you talk about climate impacts in terms of pounds of CO2 or tons of CO2. It's much more meaningful when you contextualize, okay, how am I doing versus what's average? How am I doing versus what my friends are doing? How am I doing versus what my neighbors are doing? And so that's the next piece of what we do on the information side, is we link up with Facebook and also have a partnership with UC Berkeley's Cool Climate Network that have a bunch of data about average climate impacts down to the zip code level and different household sizes and different income groups. And so we can show you not only track your impacts in terms of pounds and tons of CO2, but we can also show you how these impacts compare to your friends and to your family and to your neighbors. And then the next piece is transferring that information about impacts into actual action. And I think that's where a lot of us get stuck with climate change, because it just seems like such a big global issue that there are so many facets to it, we don't really know where to start. And so a big piece of what we're doing is tracking impacts, contextualizing impacts, but then showing you, based on your actual data, your actual lifestyle, what are the top things you can do that really make a difference. And so we have about 50 tips that we give you that are personalized based on your data for how you can both reduce your impacts on climate change and also many of these save you money at the same time. So for a family in Hawaii, we estimate, and this is based on our research with UC Berkeley, that you can save up to $7,000 per year while reducing your impacts on climate change by 20%. And so you have these huge opportunities out there for basically win-win solutions in terms of impacts that are better for climate and better for your wallet at the same time. And so we're really trying to make those apparent. And the tips that we give they range from big things like put solar photovoltaic panels on your roof or buy an electric vehicle, to smaller things like use a reusable mug, to things in the middle like using low flow shower heads or eating less red meat in your diet. And so the more you're willing to act on those, the more you can improve your own climate footprint. And then we're also, through integrating with Facebook, essentially turning this into a social game and trying to build social accountability into the process, because that's really, if you look at the behavioral psychology research about what actually motivates us to change, a huge piece of it is our inherent human desire to at least be as good as average and kind of to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, to be doing, what's normal and what our friends are doing, and feel like we're not just acting as a weird outlier, but as a contributing member of society. And I think with climate, it's easy to kind of put off action because it feels like we're acting like drops in the bucket. but with social networks and the ubiquity of Facebook, we can show that we're not acting just as individuals, that we can actually be acting as communities. So you can take actions and you can see what actions your friends are taking, and then we're building in additional incentives moving beyond the information to actually reasons to act. We're building in additional incentives that encourage you to act upon that information and share that with your friends and encourage them to actually take action as well. And so that's how we hope that this scales well beyond the individual to actually community level and eventually societal level shifts.
Right. So this is very neat that you tap into both the sort of the human cooperative spirit and competitive spirit at the same time, and take advantage of both those aspects of the human personality. This is very intriguing. We are going to have to take a short break. You're on Likeable Science here with Ethan Allen, your host here, and I've got with me via Skype Ian Monroe, the founder of and CEO of Oroeco. We'll be right back to continue this discussion in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech Digital Series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us, and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
And you're back on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. We're talking about sustainability and linking personal choices to global impacts. We're doing that today here on ThinkTech Hawaii with Ian Monroe from Oroeco. He's the CEO of this company. They are tackling this huge issue of how to really enhance global sustainability by linking essentially individual choices in small daily activities into the sort of the larger picture, and helping people understand how everything we do, every choice we make, from what food we choose to eat to how we choose to get to work to how we choose to spend and invest our money, all these things make a difference in sort of the larger global climate balance. And Oroeco is setting up wonderful automated systems to track all this stuff, give us the feedback we need. At the same time, add in this whole element of the social aspects of it by linking this into some of the big social media sites so that people can both sort of cooperate with their friends and be a little competitive perhaps for them to see who can be sort of best or do the most, or at least are we all keeping up with the average of our communities, so this is a really intriguing idea, Ian, and I'm a little curious about sort of the background of it. How did you come up with this initial idea, and then how did you sort of figure that was going to translate or be realized through an app? I mean, that's sort of, there's a huge leap there.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one of those things that just started coming together in different pieces, and certainly I don't want to be taking credit for everything that we have myself either. We have an amazing team of scientists and engineers that I'm working with, as well as some great advisors, including a couple of Nobel Prize winners from UN IPCC. And for me, the idea initially came out of about a decade of work doing renewable energy, climate change, and carbon accounting, carbon offsetting projects around the world. I think I've worked in 21 countries now throughout Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia primarily. And I saw government level approaches to climate change and nonprofit NGO level approaches, and also worked out of academia and with industry, kind of companies big and small, and saw value in all those different approaches, but really, I think, increasingly became concerned about climate change as a whole, and feeling like I was getting connected to a lot of communities that were even a lot more vulnerable to where I grew up, which was on a small farm in Northern California that definitely is already seeing climate effects there as well, with historic drought going on right now and wildfires that are associated with that. But working in the developing world, working in places like the Philippines and Nigeria and Venezuela and communities that are extremely vulnerable to changes in crop yields and sea level rise and violent storms, I think increasingly made me passionate about the issue and trying to figure out what was the biggest missing piece that could shift us from the point that we're at, where all the scientific consensus says that we have a huge problem, yet society is still not moving nearly quickly enough to fix that. And as I talked about a little bit earlier on the show, the biggest missing piece seemed to be just getting basically this bottom-up action and citizen engagement around the issue that then can also drive top-down political action at the same time. But just coming to the realization that a whole lot of our climate impacts are really just traced back to the decisions we're making on a daily basis in terms of our own lifestyles, how we spend our money, how we invest our money, because ultimately it's our money that's funding the companies that are polluting the climate, and they're doing it because it's making them profits based on the current system that we have, where they're not incentivized to pay the cost of the environmental externalities that come from climate change, and certainly other things beyond climate change as well. So that initially got me thinking about, okay, how can we engage more? And then seeing smartphones develop and essentially turn into supercomputers in our pockets, and seeing Facebook turn into this ubiquitous network that now has, I think it's 1.3 billion users around the world. And just the ability to do a whole lot with tech and really shift culture with technology. And I came out of Stanford University as an undergrad and grad student as well. So I had a lot of friends that were in the Silicon Valley tech world and definitely doing tech-focused things quite successfully. And so seeing that technology possibility, specifically working on some projects looking at the full life cycle impacts when you look from raw material production all the way through use and disposal of the biofuels industry as well as the textile industry, connected me into these databases that are out there that essentially track the environmental impacts, including climate impacts, of all the different products and processes in our industrial system, wrapping around the world in these globalized economic supply chains that we have now. And so it was a combination of seeing that all that data was available, seeing that the technology is available in terms of smartphones and massive social networks, and then also seeing the success of social gaming and the fact that we are getting really good at motivating a lot of us to engage with things like Candy Crush and Farmville. And I think we can definitely harness some of the lessons from what makes effective games into making games that are much more important, I would say, for actually shifting society towards the sustainable future that we want. So it was really a combination of all those different pieces. And then I reconnected with our CTO, Kirsten Cummings, who originally was a friend of mine at college. And she had been thinking many of the same things. And we decided to go for it. And we've brought on an incredible team beyond just the two of us that also has been, in their own way, essentially coming to the same conclusion, that this is something that we really need to engage us on an individual level and then scale those individual actions to communities and society.
Huh. No, it's just very intriguing how you've done that this wonderful balancing of the individual, the folks in the individual, their choices and all, and at the same time tying it into to a larger sort of social interaction. I think it's extremely well suited. I think in the U.S., I can see how this will play out. I suspect you may find challenges. I was just reading some material about the internet in China and how the one big thing they don't want is social cohesion or social movements coming up at all. You can criticize the leadership perfectly well and not get in any trouble for it, but if you do anything to try to get followers together and get mass social action, the government there stomps on it very, very heavily. So you're going to tread a fine line there for sure. But are you in China? I mean, do you have your?
We're actually working on it right now. That's actually our ultimate metric of success, is if either we're able to succeed in China or what is much more common for Western technology companies is essentially a bunch of Chinese clone companies, very similar companies, pop up and do much better than the Western technology companies coming in. Partially because the market is kind of rigged to make that happen. But yeah, definitely our ultimate metric of success is either Oroeco or something like Oroeco succeeds in China for bottom-up climate engagement and action. And I think there actually is a lot of market for that. I've lived and worked in China a couple times. I lived in Beijing for about 6 months working with Natural Resources Defense Council. Actually, that's where I was doing the project on life cycle textile impacts. And that was part of what was the inspiration for Oroeco as well, is seeing all the pollution in China that's written about a whole lot. What hasn't been written about as much is that about 30% of that pollution that we see that makes it so sometimes you can't even see across the street or rivers run red is attributed to exports. So a whole lot of that pollution is actually essentially our pollution that we've outsourced to China because the labor and manufacturing that used to happen in the US now primarily is happening there. And so I think that just illustrates the global interconnectedness of our supply chains. And I also was really pleasantly surprised. If you look at polling out of Pew and others, Ogilvy did a great study called Mainstream Green, comparing green attitudes in China versus the US. Environmental awareness and actually the gap between awareness and action in China is much better than it is in the US, partially because the environment is just a really pressing public health issue. And climate change is starting to get more on the radar. China just announced what will be the world's largest carbon market. They've been doing some regional carbon markets there, and now they're going to do a national cap and trade policy, which is going farther than anything that we have done here in the US. And China is also still building out wind and solar and electric vehicles much more quickly than we're doing here in the US. They are also still building a coal-fired power plant every 2 months, or 2 weeks rather, I think is the stat. But I think there is a whole lot of potential engagement in China, and the environment is one of the issues that actually the central government has allowed a lot more free speech on, because I think there just is pretty universal recognition that things need to change, and that it's an issue that will really divide society if air quality, which is definitely linked to China because most of the air problems are linked to coal, doesn't substantially improve. And Chinese consumers also are already buying as much organic food as they can because there's lots of concerns about a third of the ag land in China has been declared unfit for agricultural production because of heavy metals and other contaminants, but it hasn't been announced where that land actually is. So anyway, I digress, but I think the point I was focusing on is that I do really think there's a substantial demand for what we're doing in China and really around the world based on talking to some potential Chinese partners. We already have had a Chinese university approach us about partnering on this. And certainly we're looking at Latin America and Europe as well as places we're planning to expand to pretty quickly.
That's intriguing and very encouraging actually to hear that. Let me jump for a few moments here into sort of what data do you have now to show that you're having an impact? I mean, how do you measure this? How do you what evidence do you have that people are changing their habits based on getting this information? You brought together through Oroeco a tremendous wealth of information, huge multiple databases. Obviously, you have to tap into and be able to feed back and forth. How do you know it's working? You know?
Well, to be honest, the short answer is we don't yet. We launched our beta service on Earth Day, so we've only been out for a few months now, and we're still adding a whole lot of the pieces that we think really will be driving the personal engagement, and then also shifting that engagement to drive behavior change and expand beyond individuals to communities and beyond, and really essentially what we want is a user experience that just is rewarding enough that everybody wants to share it with their friends and family and others that they know that care about climate change. And so part of that is making the social gaming aspects of it just, as fun and social and rewarding as possible. And then we are also building in what we're calling Oro points that will be kind of a virtual currency similar to frequent flyer miles that you earn by engaging with a platform that eventually you'll be able to trade in for more sustainable products and services. And we're also doing giveaways for users that are more engaged with the platform, where you get a chance to win actual physical real-world prizes. So we've been giving away Nest Smart thermostats, and hopefully we'll grow to the point that we're able to give away larger prizes like home solar systems and Tesla electric vehicles. So that's part of the hook that we hope really helps us grow, is that eventually, and hopefully not in the too distant future, you'd have a chance to win a Tesla simply by engaging with Oroeco. And that's where the name came from. Oroeco is really focusing on the rewards. So oro is gold in Spanish and Latin root for gold, and then eco for both economics and ecology. So really we want to focus on the aspect of the platform, which is that everybody should be rewarded for making the world essentially the better place that we want to live in.
Well, that's certainly, it sounds like you've launched something that's very exciting. I look forward to seeing it move along. What do you see as your big near-term challenges?
Well, definitely internationalization is one of them. One of the things we're adding right now is when we first launched, we initially required users to be also a user of this service called mint.com, which is free, and it's something that a number of people use already. They have over 10 million users. Mint is owned by Intuit, which is the same company that has Quicken and TurboTax and QuickBooks, and also works with a lot of banks running their software. But definitely, because a part of what we can do in terms of automated carbon tracking is tracking basically the carbon footprint of every dollar that you spend and invest. It's great for users that are willing to do that, but some users are really nervous about online finances and privacy and security, quite understandably, in general. So something we've been working quite hard on recently is having an option to use the service without connecting it up to your finances if you don't want to do that. So that will be launching hopefully in the next couple weeks. And so that's something that also makes us available essentially to an international audience, because mint.com only works in the US and Canada. And it's a great service if you're into it. I certainly am. It automatically tracks how you're spending your money in your different accounts, and so it really helps you budget out how much you're spending on coffee shops versus gasoline, and saving money alongside the piece that we're tacking onto it that tracks your climate footprint based on where your money goes. But we want to be creating Oroeco to be basically as accessible to as broad a range of people around the world as possible. So that's been a big focus, is going beyond that, and having a non-mint option for Oroeco allows anyone in the world to use it. And then we're adding in additional international data, so you can compare how your footprint looks versus the average person in Berlin or the average person in Shanghai, if that's where you're living. And then another big piece that we're working on right now is the investment side. So, our impacts are definitely linked up to what we eat, how we get around, our transportation, our clothing and other shopping, and our home energy use. But the investments that we make, where we stick our money in the bank, and what our investment portfolio also makes a difference. And that's a piece that we've been working on quantifying. And actually, I still teach courses on climate change and renewable energy at Stanford, and I have been working with my academia hat on with the United Nations Environmental Program and the World Resources Institute to help extend what's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol as the standard for accounting for financed emissions, which are essentially emissions that come from investing money via equity investments or loans into projects and investment portfolios, and then being able to scale that up to a financial institution's climate impact. So that's something I've been working on a lot more with my academia hat on, but then with Oroeco, we're also working on basically using those standardized calculations to create a premium version of the service that would be able to footprint your investment portfolio alongside your impacts. And we're also looking at creating some low carbon investment products to go along with this movement that's been led by 350.org to get institutions like Stanford to divest from fossil fuels.
Excellent. Well, wow. It sounds, Ian, like you're doing an amazing array of things, a huge wealth of projects, and tying really some very big and important issues together in very exciting ways. I certainly look forward to following Oroeco here in the future and seeing how it moves along and grows. And I think that if people will join with you, it ought to really have some tremendous impacts there. So that's great. But we are about out of time now. I thank you so much for being with me here today, Ian, and taking the time to join me. And I very much appreciate your sharing this good information.
Thanks a lot, Ethan. And really, just for your viewers out there, we definitely see what we have already in the beta is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we'd like to do. And it really, the way to make this successful is to get as much feedback as we can in improving the process. So if anybody who's watching just goes to oroeco.com, oroeco.com, and creates a profile and gives us feedback on what they like and what they don't, that'll definitely increase our likelihood of getting to the tens of millions and eventually hundreds of millions of users that we feel we need to really push this into a scalable solution to climate change. And we think if we can do this for climate change, we can also essentially replicate this for a lot of other large-scale environmental, societal, and personal health issues, as we have data essentially that also links up how you spend and invest your money to things like biodiversity, water use, and living wages, etc.
Super. That's incredibly great, incredibly ambitious, and seems like you're well on your way to accomplishing these things and overcoming some great challenges. It's wonderful to talk with you, but we are now out of time, and I'm going to have to sign off. You've been with us here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today has been Ian Monroe from Oroeco. We've been solving the world's problems, I guess you could say. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.